Good morning, friends. We learned this past Sunday that the only way for us to have the motivation we need to actually share the gospel message with people is compassion. If we don't have compassion for people, if we aren't burdened over the fact that people have been taken captive by the deceptions of the world and their own sinful desires, if we don't in some sense hurt because of how lost people are, we aren't really going to be motivated to show them the way of salvation in the gospel message. And of course, we saw this deep compassion demonstrated most purely in the person of Jesus Christ. When Jesus looked at the masses of the people, his heart went out to them because they were so lost, because they were so harassed and crushed by the lies of false teaching. And people today are subject to the exact same kinds of lies, and are going to be going to the same kind of destination as those that Jesus looked at if they did not submit to his salvation. But we also saw that we can't just generate in our own power more compassion. First off, it just won't work that way. Because it's true that some people seem to be more predisposed to compassion than other people are. But even the folks who do have that more natural bent toward compassion and sympathy and everything, there's still a limit to what that person can produce. I had an experience one time involving a woman that I would have categorized as an incredibly compassionate person. She was always thinking of other people, and she had been an awesome source of encouragement to me in the early years of my pastoral ministry. But then one Sunday I preached a message which included the idea that people who practice homosexuality can still be forgiven. And after the service, she came up to me livid that I could say such a thing from the pulpit. In her mind, homosexuality was such a grievous sin that it could not be forgiven, nor should it be. Now, I agree that homosexuality is a grievous sin. The scriptures make that abundantly clear. But the scriptures also make it very clear that all sorts of grievous sins are nevertheless able to be forgiven due to the tremendous grace of God. But here this woman was, a person I would have classified as being, in human terms, one of the most compassionate people I've ever met, but she had her limit. There was a certain boundary to her compassion, and the sin of homosexuality in this case was beyond that limit. The point is that for us to be compassionate to the degree, to the extent that we should be, it needs to come from Christ. Because, again, even the most compassionate human being, since they are a sinful human being themselves, still has a point beyond which their compassion refuses to go. And that's a massive problem because the Lord has not called us to take the message of salvation only to those people that we already like, or to those people who haven't crossed the line of the limit of our own compassion. No, Jesus wants us to take the message of salvation even to the lowest of the low. I mean, just consider two specific expressions of compassion that came from Jesus even as he hung on the cross. He's in the process of being murdered by the Romans with the inciting support of the Jewish population, and yet what does he pray for from the cross? In the middle of his agony, caused by the people that he's actually praying for, he still cries out, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And what did he say to the thief, or more specifically to the criminal that hung alongside him? Did he not say, "Today you will be with me in paradise," when that man asked him to remember him? And understand, of course, that for a person to be crucified as a criminal, well, his criminal offenses had to be significant. This man wasn't just a purse-snatching thief. He was probably a murderer or worse. And yet the Lord was willing to extend his compassion to this man. In any case, I think we understand then that to have compassion as Christ would have us have compassion, we must get that compassion from him. And as we outlined on Sunday, that means getting to know Jesus in his word, submitting ourselves to him, relying upon him, and being changed by him as a result of that process. That the more we come to love him for who he is, the more we then become like him. Our desires will start to conform to his desires. Our ability and willingness to demonstrate compassion will grow more and more like his ability and willingness to demonstrate compassion, even to those we otherwise would be incapable of showing compassion to because of the limits of our own sinfulness. And here's the bottom line I really want to get to with all this morning. The ultimate purpose of gaining compassion from the Lord Jesus, rather than being able to generate it ourselves, the ultimate end to that is for the glory of God, which we see clearly in 1 Corinthians 1:26 and following, where Paul writes, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards, not many were powerful, not many were noble birth, but God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God." Now, there's a lot there, as there always is in Paul's writings, but that whole first section can basically be summed up as God chose those people who are incapable of doing what God requires, so that by applying God's own power to those people so that they can do what God requires of them, then none of those people can boast in themselves. But as Paul goes on to say in verse 2 later, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord. You see, God alone is worthy of all glory and honor and praise. Any boasting we do, if we boast in ourselves, is sinful. But there is a pure and sinless sort of boasting we can do, and that is a boasting in the Lord. And that's how it should be, because he is worthy of being glorified, of having more attention brought to his power and majesty. And that's the ultimate reason why we need to express our compassion to others as it is supplied to us by Christ, because then all the honor and glory for that compassion goes to God. And our activity in showing that compassion to others becomes itself an act of worship on our part toward Christ, who supplied that compassion. And that is what our overarching job is to do, to bring glory and honor to God alone. We deliver that message of salvation, that gracious message of salvation, is not simply so that people would be spared from the eternal judgment of hell. Obviously, that is certainly a key part of it. But ultimately, we do that so that God's glorious grace can be glorified. We humble ourselves, we exalt the Lord, as is right to do, and then we know that at the proper time he will vindicate us and lift us up as well. And how much better to be lifted up by the God of the universe rather than trying to lift ourselves up. So, to God be the glory in all these things, in our faith, in our obedience, in our general living sacrifice, and yes, of course, to God be the glory in the compassion that we are able to show to those who do not deserve compassion, even as we did not deserve compassion, but we're able to show it to them nevertheless because it's been supplied to us by God himself through the grace of Jesus Christ. And so we depend upon him for that compassion, and we give him glory for it. My friends, have a good and godly day, and Lord willing, I will see you soon.